nobody really looked at her. That was the truth of it. She could walk right past someone, refill their champagne glass, clear their empty plate, and they'd keep talking as if she didn't exist. 3 years she'd been doing this job at the Grandmont Hotel. She'd gotten used to being invisible. Her name was Maya Torres. She was 26 years old, and if you'd asked anyone at the hotel to describe her, they probably couldn't. Brown hair pulled back in a neat bun. The standard black and white uniform. White gloves that hid her hands. That was about it. Nothing special. Nothing worth remembering. But Maya didn't mind most days. The job paid her bills. It kept a roof over her head. And honestly, after everything she'd been through, she'd learned that being invisible had its advantages. You heard things when people forgot you were there. You saw things. The real faces people wore when they thought no. One important was watching. Tonight was the annual classical music gala. It happened every year at the Grandmont. And it was always the same crowd. Old money. New money. People who wore watches that cost more than most cars. Women in gowns that sparkled under the chandeliers. Men in tuxedos that were probably cut. They came to see and be seen, to bid on expensive things at the charity auction, to feel good about themselves for one evening. Maya had worked this event for the past 2 years. She knew the routine. Champagne on silver trays, little fancy appetizers that had French names she couldn't pronounce. Smile politely. Don't make eye contact for too long. Move through the crowd like water, smooth and unnoticed. The ballroom looked incredible tonight, she had to admit. Crystal chandeliers threw soft light across everything. The marble floors gleamed. Round tables with white silk tablecloths circled the room, each one decorated with flowers that probably cost more than Maya made in a week. And right in the center of it all, on a raised platform, sat the star of the evening, a piano. But not just any piano. This was a Steinway grand piano worth over $2 million. Maya had heard the other servers talking about it in the kitchen. It was rare, apparently. Special. Only a handful like it in the world. Tonight, famous pianists would take turns playing it, and then at the end of the evening, someone would buy it at auction. All the money would go to some music charity. At least that's what they said. Maya balanced her tray carefully as she moved between clusters of guests. The conversations all blended together after a while. Someone talking about their villa in Italy. Someone else complaining about how hard it was to find good help these days. A woman laughing too loudly at a joke that probably wasn't that funny. A man checking his phone even though his wife was talking to him. "Excuse me, miss." A hand waved at her, and Maya turned with her practiced smile. A woman in an emerald green dress wanted more champagne. Maya poured it. The woman took the glass without even glancing at her face. The conversation continued as if Maya had never been there. That was fine. That was normal. Maya had stopped expecting anything different a long time ago. What these people didn't know, they couldn't know just by looking at her, was that Maya understood this world. Not the money part, not the designer dresses and expensive jewelry, but the music. She understood the music better than most of them ever would. There was a time, years ago, when Maya had been someone different. When she'd had a future that looked nothing like this. She'd been 15 when she won the state youth piano competition. 15 years old, and she'd played like her fingers were made of magic. At least that's what the judges said. They'd never heard someone so young play with such feeling, such technical skill. At 16, the letter came from Juilliard. Full scholarship. Her music teacher had cried when Maya showed her. Her mother had hugged her so tight Maya could barely breathe. It was everything they'd worked for. Everything they'd dreamed about. Maya was going to be a concert pianist. She was going to play in halls like this one, but not as invisible help. As the person everyone came to see, but life has a way of changing plans. When Maya was 17, her mother got sick. Cancer. The word that changes everything. And suddenly, there were hospital bills, and her 2 younger siblings who needed taking care of. And her father, who decided he couldn't handle it and just left one day. Packed a bag and walked out while her mother was getting chemotherapy. Maya never made it to Juilliard. She deferred for a year, thinking things would get better. Then she deferred again. Then she stopped answering their emails. She got a job waitressing. Then another one. Then this one at the Grand Mont. The tips were better here. The rich people didn't always notice, but sometimes they left 20s instead of 5s. Her siblings were grown now. Her brother was in community college, working part-time at a grocery store. Her sister had moved to another state with her boyfriend. They were doing okay. They'd survived. Her mother hadn't. 2 years ago, in a hospital room that smelled like disinfectant and sadness, her mother had squeezed Maya's hand one last time and told her she was proud. Proud of how strong Maya was, how she'd kept the family together, how she'd sacrificed everything. Maya hadn't touched a piano in 9 years. Not really. Sometimes, when the Grand Mont had events like this, she'd stay after her shift and sit at whatever piano was there, when the ballroom was empty and dark. She'd play one song, just one. Usually something by Chopin, because Chopin had always been her favorite. Then she'd close the lid, take off her gloves, and go home to her small apartment. The dreams had faded. That's what happens when you're 26 and you've been away from something for 9 years. The dreams fade, and you learn to live with what is instead of what might have been. You learn that being invisible isn't the worst thing in the world. You learn that paying rent and buying groceries is its own kind of accomplishment. Tonight, though, something felt different. Maya couldn't explain it. Maybe it was the piano, so beautiful and perfect on its platform. Maybe it was the way the music would fill this space soon, the way it always did, reminding her of the person she used to be. Maybe it was just one of those nights where the past sat a little heavier on her shoulders. She refilled more glasses. She cleared more plates. She smiled and nodded and moved through the crowd like a ghost. And she waited for the evening's performances to begin, knowing that she'd stand in the back and listen, the way she always did, close enough to hear every note, far enough away that no one would notice the expression on her face or the way her fingers moved slightly. Unconsciously, following along with music only she could play in her mind, the guests were getting excited now. The program was about to start. Someone famous was going to play first. Maya had seen his name on the promotional posters. Viktor Kozlov, some renowned Russian pianist who'd played at Carnegie Hall and the Sydney Opera House and probably every other important venue in the world. Maya picked up another tray of champagne glasses and headed back into the crowd, ready for another evening of being no one, seeing everything, and remembering what it felt like when music was everything and the whole world had been full of possibility. The lights dimmed and the crowd began to settle. Maya stood near the back wall, her empty tray tucked under her arm. This was her favorite part of these events, when the talking finally stopped and the music began. When all these people who spent their lives making noise had to be quiet and just listen, the master of ceremonies walked to the microphone. He was an older man with silver hair, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than Maya's car. He started talking about the charity, about how important music education was, about the incredible instruments and performances they'd witnessed tonight. Maya had heard versions of this speech a dozen times. She let the words wash over her, her eyes fixed on the piano. Then he said the name. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to present one of the greatest living pianists of our time. He has performed for royalty, sold out concert halls across 6 continents, and his recordings have won every major award in classical music. Please welcome Viktor Kozlov. The applause was thunderous. Maya watched as a man walked onto the stage. He was probably in his 50s, tall and thin, with sharp features and dark hair streaked with gray. He moved with the kind of confidence that came from decades of being excellent at something. He nodded to the audience, a slight smile on his face, and sat down at the piano. The room went completely silent. That kind of silence that feels thick, like everyone's holding their breath at the same time. Viktor raised his hands above the keys. Maya found herself leaning forward slightly, her heart beating faster. She knew what he was about to play. The program had listed it. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. One of the most beautiful, most demanding pieces ever written. His hands came down. The first notes rang out, powerful and clear, and Maya felt something inside her chest crack open. Just a little. The feeling she'd been pushing down for 9 years. The feeling of what it was like to speak through music, to say things that words could never capture. But then something happened. Victor's hands stuttered. He pulled back from the keys, his face twisting in pain. The music stopped abruptly, leaving an awkward, incomplete phrase hanging in the air. People gasped. Victor clutched his right hand with his left, his jaw clenched. He tried to play again, managed 3 more notes, then stopped completely. The crowd erupted in concerned murmurs. Someone from backstage rushed out. A woman in a dark blue suit, probably Victor's manager or assistant, reached him quickly. They spoke in hushed tones, but Maya could see Victor shaking his head, still holding his hand. The woman turned to the audience and spoke into the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. Maestro Kozlov has experienced a sudden muscle spasm in his hand. He will not be able to perform this evening." The murmuring got louder. Maya watched as Victor walked off stage, still cradling his hand, looking frustrated and embarrassed. The master of ceremonies came back, trying to calm everyone down, explaining that these things happen, that the show would go on. But Maya could see the panic in his eyes. She'd worked enough events to recognize disaster when it was unfolding. The problem was simple. Victor was supposed to be the highlight of the evening. The other pianists weren't scheduled to arrive for at least 2 more hours. They'd planned the whole night around Victor's performance. Without it, the energy would die. People would start leaving. The auction wouldn't go as well. The charity would lose money. Maya watched the organizers huddling together near the stage. The woman in the dark blue suit was making phone calls. The master of ceremonies kept checking his watch. A man with a clipboard was flipping through pages frantically, probably trying to figure out if they could rearrange the program somehow. The guests were getting restless. Some were already standing up, gathering their things. Maya heard fragments of conversation around her. Such a shame. Well, we tried. Maybe we should head to that other event. At least we made an appearance. And Maya kept staring at the piano. That beautiful, perfect piano, sitting there silent and waiting. All that potential, all that possibility, just sitting there unused. It seemed wrong somehow, like a waste of something precious. Her fingers tingled. She flexed them inside her white gloves, feeling the familiar ache of muscle memory. She hadn't played in front of anyone in 9 years. She'd barely played at all. Those late-night sessions in empty ballrooms didn't count. Those were just her and the darkness and the ghosts of who she used to be. But she could play. She knew she could. The skills were still there. It's buried under years of exhaustion and survival and trying not to think about everything she'd lost. Her hands remembered even if her heart had tried to forget. This was crazy. This was absolutely insane. She was a waitress. She was wearing a server's uniform. These people didn't even see her as a person, let alone as someone who could touch a $2 million piano. If she spoke up, they'd probably laugh at her. Or worse, they'd be offended that she'd even suggested it. But the piano kept calling to her, and her mother's voice echoed in her head. The last thing her mother had said to her. "Don't let what you gave up be for nothing, baby. Don't let it just disappear." Maya set her tray down on a service table. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was stupid. This was the dumbest thing she'd ever considered doing. She'd get fired. She'd embarrass herself in front of hundreds of people. She'd prove that she was right to give up on music all those years ago. But her feet were moving. She was walking toward the organizers before she could talk herself out of it. One foot in front of the other, weaving through the crowd of designer gowns and expensive suits. People moved out of her way without looking at her, the way they always did. She reached the woman with the clipboard. The event coordinator is Mrs. Ashford. Maya had served her at a dozen events. Mrs. Ashford had never once made eye contact with her. Up close, Maya could see the stress on her face, the way she was chewing her bottom lip, the desperate look in her eyes as she tried to salvage the evening. Maya's voice came out smaller than she wanted, quieter. "Excuse me." Mrs. Ashford didn't even look up from her clipboard. She waved a hand dismissively. "Not now. We're dealing with this situation." Maya swallowed hard, forced herself to speak louder. "I know that's why I'm here. I can play." That got Mrs. Ashford's attention. Her head snapped up, and she looked at Maya like she'd just spoken gibberish. What? The piano. Maya's voice was stronger now, even though her whole body was trembling. I can play it. For a moment, Mrs. Ashford just stared at her. Then her expression shifted from confusion to something like annoyance. This is hardly the time for jokes. We have a real crisis here. Please go back to your station. But other people had heard. Some of the guests nearby had turned to look, and Maya could see it on their faces. Amusement, disbelief. A waitress. Playing at the classical music gala? How absurd. How entertaining? This might actually be worth staying for, just to watch the disaster unfold. A man in the crowd actually laughed out loud. A woman whispered something to her companion, and they both smirked. Maya felt her face getting hot. This was it. This was the moment she should apologize and walk away and go back to being invisible and forget this ever happened. But then she heard a voice, accented, tired. Let her try. Everyone turned. It was Victor Kozlov himself. He'd come back from backstage, still holding his hand, but watching Maya with an expression she couldn't quite read. His dark eyes studied her carefully. The way someone looks at a puzzle they're trying to figure out. Mrs. Ashford looked horrified. Maestro, I don't think what harm could it do? Victor interrupted. His voice was quiet, but something in it made people listen. The evening is already ruined. Perhaps ... He looked at Maya again, really looked at her. Perhaps we might be surprised. The silence that followed was deafening. Maya could feel 300 pairs of eyes on her. Mrs. Ashford's mouth was pressed into a thin, tight line. She looked like she wanted to refuse, but Victor Kozlov wasn't someone you could easily say no to. Finally, Mrs. Ashford gave a sharp nod. Fine. But when this goes badly, don't say I didn't warn everyone. And just like that, Maya's life changed. The crowd parted. A pathway opened to the stage, to the piano, to everything she'd left behind 9 years ago. Her legs felt like they might give out. Her hands were shaking so badly, she had to clench them into fists. But she walked forward. One step, then another, toward the music, toward the past, toward whatever happened next. The walk to the stage felt like it took forever and no time at all. Maya was aware of everything. The whispers following her. The sound of her shoes on the marble floor. The weight of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. Someone laughed. Someone else said something she couldn't quite hear, but the tone was mocking. She climbed the 3 steps to the platform. They felt higher than they should. Her server's uniform suddenly seemed ridiculous under the stage lights. Black pants, white shirt, black vest. The outfit of someone meant to blend into the background, not stand in the spotlight. She could feel sweat forming on her palms inside the white gloves. The piano sat there in front of her, huge and beautiful and intimidating. She'd played hundreds of pianos in her life, but never one like this. Never one worth more than most people's houses. Never one in front of an audience that was waiting for her to fail. Maya reached the bench and stopped. For a moment, she just stood there, her hand resting on the smooth wood. She could still turn around. She could still walk away. Say she'd made a mistake. Apologize for wasting everyone's time. Go back to being invisible. But something in her wouldn't let her. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was all those years of silence finally demanding to be heard. Maybe it was her mother's voice in her head telling her not to let the past disappear completely. She sat down. The bench was the perfect height, adjusted for Victor. She shifted it slightly, finding her position. Then she did something she hadn't done in 9 years. She took off her white serving gloves. Slowly, deliberately, she peeled them off and set them on the edge of the piano. Her hands looked different than they used to. They were still slender, still had long fingers, good for reaching across keys. But they were rougher now. Calluses from carrying trays, a small scar on her thumb from a broken glass. These weren't the pampered hands of a concert pianist. These were working hands. Survivors' hands. The crowd's whispers got louder. She heard more laughter. Someone said this should be interesting in a tone that meant they expected a train wreck. Another voice, louder, said, "I give her 30 seconds before she realizes she can't do this." Maya closed her eyes, tried to block them out, tried to remember what this felt like. The weight of the keys, the way the sound would come from her fingers, through the instrument, out into the world. She'd been 17 the last time she'd played for an audience. Just a girl with dreams and talent in a future that seemed certain. Now she was 26, tired, broke, working a job that made her invisible, but her hands still remembered. They had to remember. She opened her eyes and looked at the keys, black and white, perfectly aligned. Waiting, she raised her hands above them, hovering the way she'd been taught, the way she'd done 1,000 times before. The room was watching, waiting for the disaster, waiting for the waitress to embarrass herself so they could have a story to tell at their next party. Maya didn't play a complicated piece. Not yet. Instead, she pressed down on a single key. Middle C. One note. Clear and pure. It rang out through the ballroom, amplified by the incredible acoustics, by the quality of the instrument itself. Just one note, held for a long moment, then released. The laughter stopped. Not all at once, but gradually, like someone was turning down a volume dial. That single note had something in it. Something honest. Something that made people pause. Maya pressed the key again. The same note. Let it ring out. Then she began to play. She chose Chopin. Nocturne in E-flat major, Opus 9, number 2. It had been her mother's favorite. The piece her mother had requested over and over during those last months in the hospital. The piece Maya had promised herself she'd never play again because it hurt. Too much to remember, but now her fingers moved across the keys and the music came flowing out. Not the way she'd played as a teenager, showing off her technique, racing through the difficult passages to prove she could. This was different. This was 9 years of life poured into every note. Every loss, every sacrifice. Every night she'd fallen asleep exhausted. Every morning she'd woken up and kept going anyway. The melody was sweet and sad at the same time. It spoke of beautiful things that don't last, of moments that slip away, of love that remains even after everything else is gone. Maya's hands knew exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly when to let a note linger and when to move on. She wasn't thinking anymore. Wasn't aware of the crowd or the stage or the expensive piano. She was 17 again, playing for her mother in their small living room. She was 15, winning that first competition. She was 8 years old, discovering that her fingers could make magic happen. She was every version of herself at once. All of it was pouring out through the music. The ballroom had gone completely silent. No whispers. No laughter. No rustle of expensive fabric or clink of champagne glasses. 300 people, frozen, listening. A woman in the third row felt tears sliding down her cheeks and didn't bother to wipe them away. A man who'd been checking his phone set it down, forgotten. Mrs. Ashford. The event coordinator, who'd been so certain this would be a disaster, stood with her clipboard hanging loose in her hand, her mouth slightly open. Victor Kozlov, standing in the wings, closed his eyes and listened. He'd heard thousands of performances, played with orchestras around the world, shared stages with the greatest musicians of his generation. But this was something else. This wasn't technical perfection. This was a human heart turned into sound. Maya played through the tears that were now streaming down her own face. She hadn't realized she was crying until she tasted salt on her lips. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. This was everything she'd locked away. Everything she'd told herself didn't matter anymore. Every dream she'd buried so deep she'd convinced herself it was dead. But it wasn't dead. It had just been waiting. Waiting for this moment. Waiting for her to be brave enough to let it out. The music built to its gentle climax. Maya's fingers danced through the cascading notes, each one perfect, each one necessary. Then it began to fade. Softer, quieter, the melody becoming a whisper. Then a memory, then silence. Maya's hands lifted from the keys. The final note hung in the air, vibrating through the space. gradually fading until it was gone completely. She sat there, breathing hard, her hands trembling in her lap. For a moment, nothing happened. The silence stretched on, and Maya started to panic. Had she done something wrong? Had she embarrassed herself after all? Had she misremembered how good she used to be? Then she heard it. A single pair of hands clapping. Then another. Then another. Then the entire ballroom erupted. People were standing up. All of them. A standing ovation. The sound was deafening, echoing off the high ceilings, bouncing off the crystal chandeliers. Maya looked up, stunned, and saw faces she didn't recognize looking at her with expressions she'd never seen directed at her before. Respect, wonder, recognition. The woman who'd wanted more champagne earlier was crying openly. The man who'd laughed when Maya first volunteered was on his feet, clapping so hard his hands must have hurt. Mrs. Ashford was staring at her like she was seeing a ghost. Victor Kozlov walked onto the stage. The crowd's applause somehow got even louder when they saw him. He came straight to Maya, who was still sitting at the piano, unable to move. He reached out and took her hands in his, looking down at them. The rough hands, the working hands, the hands that had just played something impossible. Where did you train? His voice was gentle, but his eyes were intense. He needed to know. Had to know. Maya's voice came out shaky. Juilliard. I was supposed to. I got in. Full scholarship. But I never went. Why not? Someone else had joined them on stage. A man in an expensive suit, one of the gala organizers. And Maya told them. Right there on stage, with 300 people watching and listening. She told them about her mother, about the cancer, about her father leaving, about her siblings, about choosing survival over dreams, about 9 years of serving champagne and clearing plates and being invisible. The words tumbled out. She couldn't stop them. All the stories she'd kept locked inside. All the grief and loss and quiet strength it had taken just to keep going. When she finished, the room was silent again. But it was a different kind of silence now. Not the silence of judgment or mockery. The silence of people who finally understood something important. Victor still held her hands. He pulled out his phone right there on stage, made a call, spoke rapidly in Russian. Then he switched to English. Yes, exceptional talent. No, truly exceptional. We need to make this happen. Maya didn't understand what was happening. The night had taken on a dreamlike quality. Nothing felt real. Not the applause. Not Victor making phone calls. Not the way people were looking at her now, really seeing her for the first time. But it was real. All of it. And her life was about to change in ways she couldn't even begin to imagine. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Maya couldn't quite process what was happening. One moment she was a waitress, invisible in her black and white uniform. The next, she was surrounded by people who suddenly wanted to know her name, her story, everything about her. Victor kept her close, like he was afraid she might disappear if he looked away. He introduced her to people. Important people. A woman who ran a prestigious music conservatory. A man who managed concert halls in 3 different countries. Someone from a recording label. Someone else from a foundation that supported young musicians. Maya shook hands until her arm ached. She smiled until her face hurt. And through it all, she kept thinking this had to be some kind of mistake. At any moment now, someone would realize she was just a waitress, and the spell would break. But it didn't break. If anything, it got more intense. Mrs. Ashford, who'd barely looked at Maya for 3 years, kept apologizing. I had no idea. If I'd known, if someone had told me. Maya almost felt bad for her. Almost, but not quite. Because Mrs. Ashford had looked right through her hundreds of times. And it had never occurred to her that the woman serving her champagne might be a whole person with a whole history. The auction part of the evening went better than anyone had hoped. The piano sold for almost 3 times its estimated value. The buyer was an older gentleman in a navy suit who announced he was donating it to a music school. He looked directly at Maya when he said it. For students who have talent but not opportunity, like this young woman once was. The crowd applauded again. Maya felt tears threatening and blinked them back. She'd cried enough for one night. When things finally started winding down, Victor pulled her aside. They sat at one of the empty tables, away from the remaining guests. He looked tired, but his eyes were still sharp, still focused entirely on her. "Tell me the truth," he said. "When was the last time you played seriously?" "Not tonight." "Before tonight?" Maya thought about lying, about making it sound better than it was. But something about Victor made her want to be honest. 9 years ago. I've played a few times since then, but just for myself. Late at night in empty rooms, nothing serious. Nothing like what I did tonight. Victor nodded slowly. 9 years away from something like this, and you play like that? Do you understand how rare that is? How extraordinary? Maya shrugged, uncomfortable with the praise. I don't know. It felt rusty to me. I missed a note in the third section. My timing wasn't perfect. Perfection is not the same as beauty, Victor said. Technical precision can be taught. What you have, what you did tonight, that cannot be taught. That comes from somewhere deeper. He leaned forward. You need to come back to music properly, not as a hobby. As your life. I can't afford it, Maya said simply. That's why I left in the first place. Nothing's changed. I still have bills. I still need to eat. That's what I'm trying to tell you, Victor said, and there was excitement in his voice now. Things have changed. Tonight changed them. I've already made calls. I have connections, resources. There are people who want to invest in talent like yours. Maya's heart was beating fast. What are you saying? I'm saying that if you want it, you can go back to school. Finish your training, and you won't have to worry about money. There are scholarships, grants, benefactors. I run a foundation specifically for situations like this. Musicians who have the gift, but not the means. It was too much. Too big. Maya felt like she couldn't breathe. I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't even know me, Victor smiled. I know your music. That's enough. And besides, you remind me of someone. His expression grew distant for a moment. When I was young, I had a teacher who took a chance on me. I was from a small town in Russia. Poor family. No connections. But she heard me play once, and she made it her mission to help me. Everything I am today started with her believing in me when no one else did. He looked back at Maya. I've been looking for a way to repay that debt my entire life. Maybe this is it. Maybe you're it. Maya didn't know what to say. The weight of it, the possibility of it, was overwhelming. Most professional musicians started their careers years ago. Do you think music has an age limit? Do you think your hands suddenly forgot what they know? Victor shook his head. Yes, you started later than some. But you have something they don't. You have experience. Real-life experience. That came through in every note you played tonight. People felt it. Maya looked around the ballroom. Most of the guests had left, but a few remained, talking in small groups. The piano still sat on its platform, beautiful and silent. Her white serving gloves were still there too, draped over the edge where she'd left them. Can I think about it? She asked finally. Victor looked surprised. Think about it. Most people would jump at this opportunity. I know, Maya said. And I want to. More than anything. But I've spent 9 years being practical. Being responsible. I can't just flip a switch and go back to dreaming. I need to think about what this means. What it would really look like. Victor studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Of course. Take your time. But not too much time. Opportunities like this don't wait forever. Pulled out a business card and wrote something on the back. My personal number. Call me when you decide. And Maya, I hope you decide to say yes. He stood up and left her there, sitting alone at the empty table. Maya held the card in her hands, turning it over and over. On one side was printed information. On the other, in neat handwriting, a phone number and 3 words, The world waits. The ballroom was almost empty now. The cleanup crew had started their work quietly and efficiently removing the evidence of the evening. Maya recognized some of them. She'd worked alongside them before, They nodded to her, but there was something different in their eyes now. A kind of distance. Like she'd crossed over into a different world and wasn't quite one of them anymore. Mrs. Ashford approached, holding Maya's white gloves. "These are yours," she said, handing them over. Then, more quietly, "I owe you an apology. Several, actually. I never should have dismissed you like that." Maya took the gloves. They felt strange in her hands now, like artifacts from someone else's life. "It's okay. It's not really," Mrs. Ashford said, "but I appreciate you saying that." She hesitated, then added, "I spoke with management. About your position here. Given everything that happened tonight, given the opportunity you've been offered, I imagine you'll be moving on soon." It wasn't quite a question, but it wasn't quite a statement either. Maya realized that Mrs. Ashford was trying to figure out what happened next, just like she was. "I don't know yet," Maya said honestly. "I need to think," Mrs. Ashford nodded. "Well, whatever you decide, you should know that what you did tonight was remarkable. Not just the playing, though that was extraordinary, but the courage it took to step forward in the first place. That's rare." After she left, Maya sat there alone for a while longer. She thought about her apartment, small and cheap, but hers. She thought about the steady paycheck, the routine, the safety of knowing exactly what each day would bring. She thought about her siblings, doing okay now, but still struggling sometimes. She thought about her mother, who'd sacrificed everything for her kids and never got to see any of them really succeed. And she thought about the music. God, she thought about the music. The way it had felt to play again. The way her hands had remembered. The way something inside her had come back to life. Something she'd thought was dead and buried. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. "Someone sent me a video. Is that really you? Playing piano at some fancy event? Call me." Maya smiled. Of course someone had recorded it. In a room full of rich people, there had probably been dozens of phones out. She pulled up social media and searched. It took less than a minute to find it. There she was, on a screen. Standing at the piano in her server's uniform, the video had been posted an hour ago and already had thousands of views. Hundreds of comments. People calling her inspiring, amazing, proof that talent can come from anywhere. Some comments were arguing about classical music. Some were asking who she was, where she came from. Some were already calling her the waitress who silenced the elite crowd. Maya watched herself play, watched the tears on her face, watched the moment the crowd stood up. It looked different from the outside, more dramatic, more like a movie scene than something that had actually happened to her actual life. She closed the app and put her phone away. The video would do what videos do. It would spread, or it wouldn't. People would remember, or they'd forget. But right now, that didn't matter. What mattered was the decision in front of her. The choice that would define everything that came next. Maya stood up. She walked to the stage one more time. The piano was still there, though workers were getting ready to move it. She placed her hand on it gently, feeling the smooth wood. "Thank you," she whispered to it. Or maybe to her younger self. Or maybe to her mother. Or maybe to the universe that had somehow led her to this impossible moment. Then she picked up her server's tray from where she'd left it hours ago. She walked to the kitchen, punched out her time card like she'd done 1,000 times before, went home. Tomorrow, she'd make her decision. Tonight, she just needed to sit with everything that had changed. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights, Victor's business card on the table beside her. Her phone kept buzzing with messages. Her brother, her sister, old friends from high school who'd seen the video, even her former music teacher from years ago, the one who'd cried when Maya got into Juilliard. The video had gone viral. Really viral. Millions of views now. News websites were picking up the story. Waitress stuns elite crowd with hidden talent. The performance that changed everything. From serving tables to standing ovations, Maya read some of the comments. Most were kind, supportive, calling her inspiring, but some weren't. Some said she was showing off. Some said the rich people's applause was condescending. Some argued about whether she was actually that good or if people were just impressed because she was a waitress. The internet had opinions, as always. She put the phone down and closed her eyes. The noise didn't matter. The views didn't matter. What mattered was the question sitting in her chest. Getting heavier with every passing hour? Did she have the courage to try again? Because that's what scared her most. Not the logistics. Not the money, since Victor had promised that would be handled. Not even the years she'd lost. What terrified her was the possibility of failing. Of discovering that maybe she wasn't as good as everyone thought. That maybe that one performance was a fluke, fueled by emotion and 9 years of pent-up longing. What if she went back to music and found out she couldn't make it? That she was too old, too rusty, too far behind. At least right now, she could tell herself she might have been great. That she'd had potential. That circumstances had stolen her dream, not lack of talent. But if she tried and failed, she'd have to live with knowing she just wasn't good enough. The sun came up. Maya watched it paint the sky pink and orange. She made coffee. She showered. She got dressed in regular clothes, jeans and a sweater, not the uniform. She'd called in sick to work. First time in 3 years. Then she picked up her phone and dialed the number on the card. Victor answered on the second ring. "I was hoping you'd call. Need to know something," Maya said. "And I need you to be honest with me, of course." "Do you really think I'm good enough?" "Not just good for a waitress. Good enough to actually do this professionally. To compete with people who never stop training. To make a real career out of it." There was a pause. When Victor spoke again, his voice was serious. "Maya, I have been playing piano for 43 years. I have heard thousands of pianists. Hundreds of them were technically perfect. They could play every note exactly right, hit every timing, execute every difficult passage. But most of them never made me feel anything," continued. "What you did last night, that made me feel something. That made everyone in that room feel something. And that is the difference between a good pianist and a great one. Yes, you'll need to work hard. Yes, you'll need to practice, to study, to catch up on some things. But the part that matters most, the part that can't be taught, you already have that." Maya felt her throat tightened. "What if I'm not brave enough?" "You already proved you are," Victor said gently. "Walking onto that stage last night, that took more courage than most people have. The hard part is already done. Everything else is just work, and work you can do." They talked for an hour. Victor explained what he'd arranged. A full scholarship to complete her degree. A living stipend, so she wouldn't need to work. Access to practice rooms, instruments, coaching from top musicians. A mentor who'd work with her personally to help her catch up and develop her unique style. "There's one more thing," Victor said. "My foundation hosts an annual gala in 6 months. Young musicians perform for donors and industry professionals. It's how we introduce new talent to the world. I'd like you to be one of the performers." 6 months. Maya's stomach dropped. "That's not much time." "It's enough," Victor said. "If you work hard, if you commit fully, and Maya, I believe you can do this. The question is, do you believe it?" After they hung up, Maya sat with the silence for a long time. Then she called her brother. Then her sister. She told them everything. About the offer. About the fear. About not knowing if she was making the right choice. Her sister said, "You have to do it." "Mom would want you to." Her brother said, "What's the worst that could happen? You try and it doesn't work out? At least you'd know. At least you wouldn't spend the rest of your life wondering." They were right. She knew they were right. But knowing something and doing something are very different things. Maya went for a walk. She ended up at the public library, a place she used to go all the time when she was younger. They had a piano in one of the community rooms. Old, out of tune, but functional. She asked if she could use it for an hour. She sat down and put her hands on the keys. They felt like coming home. She played the Chopin Nocturne again, the one from last night. Then she played other pieces, things she'd learned as a teenager. Some came back easily. Others were harder, her fingers stumbling over passages that used to be automatic. But it felt right. It felt like the missing piece she'd been living without for 9 years. Like breathing properly for the first time in forever. When she left the library, she knew what her answer would be. 3 months later, Maya was buried in the hardest work of her life. She practiced 6 hours a day, sometimes more. Her fingers ached. Her back hurt from sitting at the piano bench. Her brain was exhausted from lessons and theory and all the things she'd forgotten, or never fully learned, but she'd never been happier. She had a small studio apartment near the conservatory. Nothing fancy, but it was hers, and she didn't have to serve anyone champagne to afford it. She had a mentor, a stern woman in her 60s, who pushed her relentlessly but fairly. She had other students to study with, most of them younger, but they welcomed her anyway. And she had music. Every single day. Not stolen moments in empty ballrooms, but real, dedicated. Glorious hours of music. The video from the gala had continued to spread. She'd been interviewed by a few local news stations. Some online music magazines had written articles about her. She had a social media following now. People who wanted to hear her story, to follow her journey. Maya tried not to think about it too much. The attention was nice, but it wasn't why she was doing this. She was doing this because when she played piano, she felt like herself. Her real self. The self she was always meant to be. 6 months after that night at the Grandmont Hotel, Maya stood backstage at Victor's Foundation Gala. She was wearing a real concert gown this time, deep blue, borrowed from another performer. Her hair was styled. She had makeup on. She looked like she belonged there. But inside, she was terrified. This was different from the Grandmont. That had been spontaneous, driven by emotion and impulse. This was planned, expected. She'd had 6 months to prepare, which meant 6 months to worry about disappointing everyone. Victor found her in the wings. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Maya admitted. He laughed. "Good. That means you care. The day you stop being nervous is the day you stop giving your best." "What if I mess up?" "Then you mess up," Victor said simply. "And you keep playing anyway." That's what professionals do. They don't expect perfection. They expect authenticity. The announcement came. Her name, the crowd applauding. Maya walked onto the stage, and this time she wasn't wearing a server's uniform. This time she belonged there. She sat at the piano, looked out at the audience. Some faces she recognized from that night at the Grandmont. Some were new. All of them were waiting. Maya placed her hands on the keys and began to play. She'd chosen a different piece this time. Debussy. Complex and beautiful and challenging. And as her fingers moved, as the music filled the hall, she realized something. She wasn't playing to prove anything. Not to Victor, not to the crowd, not to the people who doubted her or the people who'd believed in her. She was playing because this was who she was. This was what she was meant to do. And whether she became famous or just made a modest living teaching and performing. Whether the viral video was the peak of her recognition or just the beginning. None of that really mattered. What mattered was that she'd found her way back, that she'd been brave enough to try, that she'd honored her mother's sacrifice by not letting the gift disappear. The music swelled and faded. The final notes hung in the air. And when the applause came, Maya smiled. Not because of the recognition, but because she was finally, truly home. Years later, when people asked about that night at the Grandmont Hotel, Maya would tell them it wasn't really about the piano or the crowd or the video that changed her life. It was about the moment she decided to stop being invisible, the moment she chose courage over comfort, the moment she remembered that dreams don't die just because you bury them. They wait. And if you're brave enough to dig them back up, they can bloom again. Stronger and more beautiful than before, she'd eventually open her own foundation, helping other people like her. People who'd had to give up their dreams for survival. People who needed a second chance. She called it the single note because that's how every journey back begins. With one small, brave sound. One choice. One moment of faith, and it all started with a waitress who played a single note and silenced an entire elite crowd. Not with her skill, but with her courage to try.